Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Freethought Hour. Now, I have with me my regular co-host, but you won't recognize her. Tercia, how are you?
I am extremely well, John. I hope I'm not completely unrecognizable. You say it suits me. I took a very drastic step, and a university friend of mine says that women only do things like this when something big is happening. So I went from long hair to G.I. Jane style. So that's the first dramatic thing that happened in my life in the past 2 days.
It's very nice.
I know you're just saying that because you have no choice, but it will grow back eventually if I wanted to. How are you doing, John? You had a fall.
I had a fall and I've pretty much recovered from it. If I look as though I'm writhing in my seat, that's because I've still got some bruises in that pertinent part of my anatomy.
It's rather important. It's a rather important part. So I don't want to take too much of our guest's time. He is waiting in the background.
Yes.
He's very.
Would you like?
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us your news before we bring our guest on, or would you like him to be part of that?
Well, he's heard the story, so he's such a handsome young Portuguese gentleman that he might distract the audience. So I will say my little bit before he comes on. You see, I'm still very much young at heart, but it's not only my haircut that's new. On the 7th of December, we were notified that the new article or the new non-profit company that I'm involved with as a director, one of three, was approved by the company's management organization of South Africa. It's called Freethought, and we plan to do a lot. We plan to do big things. So we don't have a website yet because the company was only formally launched 2 days ago on the 7th of December. And I didn't choose the date, the 7th. I didn't know when the company would be registered formally. But I think the 7th, 7, 3, certain numbers have symbolic value. So it's something like Christmas on the 7th of December. And I am looking forward to being something like the FFRF of South Africa for Afrikaans people. And besides that, you will see that my background is different. And that is because I am at the residence of a person who was a guest on our show, Jan Havenga. He's a logistics expert. He actually moves in very high circles. I'm not sure that I can reveal too much because, you might have to kill me if I reveal too much. But I'm in Eiserfontein, which is on the west coast of South Africa, and it relates to our guest, who is Portuguese. And Bartholomew Dias was the first person to circumvent the southern tip of Africa, which was a major feat, and that led to the subsequent colonization of South Africa by the Dutch, and. But upstairs, they are quiet now, which makes me extremely nervous. There are about 15 people watching me broadcast from downstairs because as I'm speaking, we have a gathering of Afrikaner heathens in Eiserfontein.
I think we ought to explain that Kreuzfrei, I'm probably not saying it right. Kreuzfrei.
No, you're not.
No, I think we ought to explain that it means cross-free.
Cross-free. We don't need to carry crosses. Life is hard enough. We don't need a cross. We don't need to bear crosses. We don't need to bear anybody's crosses. We can just face the world and make the world a better place without any crosses to bear. And you
want to ban them, don't you, from schools and other public locations where they are too often found.
I don't like the word ban because it's negative. I would rather say keep crosses where they belong, in churches. It's fine. They belong in churches. Keep them there. And those who want to worship and experience crosses, go for it to your heart's content. But
On your own premises at your own expense. Yes, indeed. We have a
that's it.
similar situation here because there's an attempt to put a statue of a woman's head wearing a hijab in the Midlands. And it's a monster. It's a ton of steel and it's 16 feet high and rusty. It's not a pretty thing. Anyway, let's stop keeping Diogo waiting.
And
Oh.
I will move into the background because we have a very nice young man about whom I know very little. I know he's Portuguese. I know his name. I know he worked as a technician, and that's about all I know about you. So please, Diogo.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my thoughts. I don't really have a big online presence, but Richard found me on Facebook writing some things he found interesting, and so that's what I came here to comment on. How would you like me to start again?
Well, the normal procedure in these shows is to ask our guest, how they got to be the person they are today. So do you have a story to tell about your journey through life so far?
Sure.
Hang on. Before you begin, Diogo, I need to know, what can anybody who looks about 15 have to say about a journey in life? That's interesting in itself. How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 29 years old.
Young. Okay, good.
Well, young. When I was like 4 years old, I asked my parents, "Hey, how old are you?" and such, and everybody at school asks me that, and they would say, "I'm like 25, 24," and now I'm 29, and that confuses me. well.
You look about 17. So you have good genes because you've got a ways to go. It's good to look 17 at 29. Good for you.
Thank you. What could I say? Well, I've been trying to delve into video game programming because it's something I can do at home. The job market isn't great, and I live in a small town, so there aren't many job positions to take.
Yeah.
But the part of that, I sometimes write on Facebook because I think science denial people are quite the interesting bunch, let's say. It's kind of an entertainment.
Yes, putting it kindly. Yes, but you're in a country which is still to this day quite strongly Roman Catholic, I believe.
Somewhat, yes, you could say, like at least culturally.
Yes. Did that affect you as you were growing up in your village?
Sure. That's an interesting story. So my parents, or even my grandparents, always talked to me about God and going to church and such, but I don't feel they were very religious. They just said something like, hey, it would be nice if you believed in God or whatever. And my grandmother insisted on saying Christmas was like baby Jesus Day instead of Santa's Day. That was an interesting quirk of her. Nobody else did that. But apart from that, not really. I wasn't indoctrinated or anything.
Good. You escaped. Well done. So your schooling wasn't particularly Roman Catholic then?
I went to church a couple of times, and I guess I was too young at the time to really understand what was going on. So I kind of just either asked to go away or slept or fell asleep. So people stopped bringing me there. But I kind of that grinded my gears a bit. Like, all right, people say God does this, God is that. So what is the how does this work? Because some things are contradictory,
Mhm.
um, and I wasn't quite sure what was supposed to be taken metaphorically or literally.
Yeah.
Generally, people said if I ask something about the Bible, generally people just say, "Ah, that's metaphorical. That's like a parable, just like a fable or something." So, like the attitude is,
Sorry,
yeah.
I just want to ask before we continue, because I think it's important when you talk about the Bible,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking about your age. So in the Portuguese school system, you say that you're from a small town. Did you go to a public school, and how what is the extent of, or the influence of religion in public schools, if you attended a public school in Portugal? And do you have, for example, things like daily devotions or opening the scripture? How much in your school life and your education, how much were you exposed to religious, maybe not indoctrination, but just rituals and
Yeah.
ritual in your school, in your schooling? And how did that impact you? Was there anything like that at all?
Okay, so something you have to understand first. So there is as I was saying, the attitude in my town, and I think generally in the middle-sized towns like mine, is that people keep their religious beliefs to themselves, like they are in a closet about it.
Mhm.
It's usually a bad form to talk about it to other people.
Yeah.
So people like Jehovah's Witnesses are very have a really bad fame because they do the opposite.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
And so I think even in religious institutions, which we have, people still stick to that attitude. So if you
Ah,
are there, you pray, but you don't talk about it.
right. Isn't it interesting? Because I remember my mother telling me around the dinner table, don't talk about politics or religion.
Yeah.
Because, it's not going to be an enjoyable conversation if you broach those subject areas.
So
Yeah.
while I was growing up, to answer more specifically to what Tercia was saying, while I was growing up, I frequented um, religious class, like moral and religious education. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also there was after school, what do you call it? Like a place where children go after school, so they have a place to go when the parents are still at work.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
So, and these are also religious institutions. So,
Uh-huh.
Okay, hang on. I find this extremely interesting because as a South African, we tend to think of Europe as this extremely secular place. And of course, we also think of Europe as this amorphous place, and we don't realize how unique the culture in each country is. And even in one country, how different the experiences of people living, for example, like you say, in a small town. How far away are you from Lisbon? I mean, I know about Lisbon. Lisbon is the capital of Portugal. How far are you from Lisbon? It just goes to show how intricate these things are. I find it extremely interesting that there's actually an after school place, which I find positive, that kids have a place to go after school where they are safe and they are taken care of. But is this organized by the state, by the church, by the schools? I'm actually stunned. But
all right, I will clarify. You have a good point. So first, the school lessons. The school is public. The lessons are optional. To be honest, I only went there because I wanted to receive little magazines they would give out and kind of forget about the rest of the lesson. So I wasn't a really good student. But apart from that, what else? So the after school places, they have they have prayer before lunch. But and I went to a choir singing once or twice, but that's about it. Like I was there for 1 or 2 years, and we only did religious things like once in a year, so it's not really big deal. The institution is private and religious, but like Catholically based, and like if you want to go, like if you want to study for to be a priest or whatever, you can talk to them about those things, but it's all optional. It's all like, don't really talk about it, we don't care.
Interesting.
Okay, and is this, so you say, and I'm asking this because the relationship between state and private sector does have an impact. Is this state, is it, did your parents have to pay for you to go to this place? You say it was privately owned. Was it subsidized by the government? And you know, I just had a conversation with Jan, and I always say that the devil is in the details, and
Yes,
it might seem like an insignificant question, but I think it's quite important to understand how these things work.
Without derailing the whole conversation about my political thoughts on the matter, the state pays for the schools, the public schools, like where I went. Technically, it pays for the schools, but you have to pay for the materials, the transportation, the like the food, whatever. Just being to school is free. Everything else is paid somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So derailment ended. You back on track. Off you go.
Well, I know that following that experience, Diogo went to an international school. So are we up to that stage yet?
Oh, well, not really a school. It was it was more of a course.
All right.
So I went to an Oxford School of English, where they teach people to talk English. So this is a bit irrelevant, but my idea at the time was to be able to watch American movies without subtitles.
A lot of people learnt their English by doing that.
It's funny because there is like 30, 50 years ago, the main second language of Portuguese people was French. But after World War and whatever, American hegemony, people started getting interested in English more often than not. And there is a very big attitude of everybody should be able to talk English. So if they travel, it's easier and they can go to any course they want, etc., etc.
And they can join in events like this.
Exactly. Well, in my case, I didn't think of any of that. I just find it funny that people who take English very seriously have a harder time to learn it than someone like me, who was just goofing around. That was my point.
Now, Gabriella, thank you for watching us, Gabriella. Maramak.
Yeah, she's my friend.
Great. Well, she's welcome. And you've got a good choice of friends, I think. So she says, on mentioning Lisbon, we should bring up the JMJ. What's that?
Oh, I kind of was trying to avoid that today, but we can mention a little bit. So I forget exactly, like a month ago or so, there was this huge event with the Pope. The Pope came visit, so we built a huge arena-like place so to receive him, and like people from Catholics from around the world came in. But it was a big controversy. Whenever the state wants to build a big project, suddenly it's a big controversy because everyone is asking, where is the money going? Who is taking the money? Is it enough money? Are they using too much money? Etc.
That's my money. Do I want it spent like that?
It's basically that. There was a big divide where people were saying, religion isn't that important. Why do we have to spend so much money for this? It's not like it's a scientific observatory or something.
So
And
I
those,
wanted to get onto that because after you mastered English, and you really have mastered it very well, I wanted to talk about science because you've obviously, this is where we bumped into each other because we were arguing with some creationist or something.
yes,
And you obviously are on the side of evolution. Not that it is a side, this is not a football match.
yes,
Evolution is established. So
exactly.
that is the only side, if you want to phrase it like that. And so this is something of a mission of yours. Tell us
Uh,
about your interest in combating creationism.
well, not really a mission. I'm more of a cowboy in that respect. so, um, like, let me start by saying that in the first years of school, I had this experience where the teacher would say something like, in the medieval times or whatever, people thought the earth was flat. And so,
Which is not true.
okay, we'll get there. It's a myth, of course, but it
Yes.
gives me that idea that there is certain things like Bible stories or whatever, which people in the ancient times used to believe, but we are now over that. We are now the civilized society, and
Yeah.
don't get into those things. So when I learned that there are people who actually the earth is flat, there are people who deny vaccines, there are people who believe in astrology, there are people who whatever. I started, uh, whoa, there's a rabbit hole I want to explore in here. So I'm going to try to find these people and talk to them and see what they really think. But right, am I really attempting to push evolution or proper science onto people? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Depends on my mood. It's not really my main goal, but sometimes I find it an interesting challenge, like a sociological challenge. Let's say
A bit
there
of
are
fun.
people.
I
There are
want to
people.
ask.
Let me just say this. So there are people who engage in these conversations, these debates, like, look, there is something wrong with these people. I have to fix them or whatever. I don't really think you can fix them unless they want to.
Yeah.
So if they are too deep in the hole, I don't think you can bring them back unless they have stakes in it. Like if they start working with a scientist,
Yeah.
they will change their mind because that will change their livelihood or lifestyle. But yeah, if they are just a barista or a farmer, of course they don't have a reason to change their mind. So I'm not trying to.
No. So Tercia, this is where this must resonate with you because you were down that hole at one stage. Did you have to be brought out of it? Isn't really applicable, is it? It's like Diogo says, you have to make your own mind up about it.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting to me. I so I always tell people, most of our conversations, I have no background. John tells me who the guest is if I didn't source them myself. So I had no idea whether you were an atheist or believer, because to me that's not really important. What's important is what kind of conversation can we have. And what you said about you don't really want to convince people of anything. You want to engage more from the point of view. I find the use of the idea of from a sociological point of view, I find that extremely interesting. And I also think that is the approach that we should have when we have conversations with people. And I particularly like the idea that we don't have conversations so much to convince people of our point of view as to understand why they believe what they believe, and to help them to understand why they believe what they believe. Because when one begins to ask oneself, why do I believe this, or why do I not believe what I believe, then one begins a process of learning and enrichment and discovery. And it's not clear, it's never clear when one begins the journey where the end might lead one to. But just to go on that journey is enriching in itself. And I very much like what you said about a sociological understanding. And I had a situation earlier this week with somebody who's a believer in the flat earth. And on that note of the flat earth, I have empirical proof that the earth is not flat. And my proof is I have 4 cats, and if the earth was flat, nothing would have been on top of it anymore, because the cats would have just pushed everything off the edges by now. So anybody who believes in a flat earth, just get a cat or 2. But I had this, so it's a young earth, flat earth believer based on what that person reads in the Bible. And in the conversation, the other person in the group was sort of saying, no, don't talk about this like you said your mom said, John, because when you talk about religion and politics, it's not a good conversation. And to me, the most important point to bring across is that we need to teach our children and our young people that we should have enough respect for one another to be able to converse about anything, in particular when we disagree. And the ultimate goal of having a conversation with the interlocutor is to understand where they're coming from. Because to me, that's the ultimate show of respect for the other person, is to really honestly try to find out where they're coming from. Whether you agree or disagree is sort of the next level. The first level is just, why do you believe what you believe? Can you explain it to me? And those are the most interesting conversations. And it took me a while to learn that. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get there. I want to hear your comments about that, Diogo, about what I said just now.
So there are many approaches you can take with this. Look, there is when I started learning about these things, my thinking was like, there is the mainstream science, or the mainstream what's the word, agreement on things,
consensus.
Not consensus, that's it. The mainstream consensus, and that's pretty good. It's usually based on tried and true ideas and peer review and whatever. But when you live in a society which incentivizes you to doubt experts, the mainstream stuff suddenly becomes sounds threatening, in a sense, at least to your identity. You start doubting who else. If most people are lying to me, who else could be lying to me?
It turns out that people have started to confuse experts with authorities.
Exactly.
And they don't like being spoken to by an authority, so they're prepared to. In fact, we had a politician who said, what was it he said? It was Michael Gove. He's still in the government. And he said, we don't need experts. I think it was that. And can you imagine? I mean, if he's got I've had a heart operation. I did.
I'm having a reception, Lear, like a signal. That person is a conservative.
How did you guess? Well, you're obviously well tuned in. Yes. But the thing is, when I needed a heart operation, I didn't go to the chap who delivers the milk. I went to an expert. And
so there are tougher questions to answer in this regard. For example, experts sometimes make mistakes. Like if you go to a doctor and the doctor does the wrong diagnosis on you, it's fair to trust the doctor less, and that happens a lot. But then people usually don't think like this. But I thought like this, which is then how can we ascertain the truth in the world? Like, we can't all be experts. Like, I can't take a medical degree just to diagnose myself, and even then I could make mistakes.
Yes.
So I started listening to atheists podcasts on YouTube.
Yes.
So like Matt Dillahunty, for example, or The Amazing Atheist or whatever.
Yes.
And they talked about epistemology.
Yes.
I was like, that's what they call, what philosophers call the search for truth, or the testing of claims.
Yes.
And that's where I started becoming knowledgeable in these kind of things. Like, how can I tell this atheist is telling the truth, or how can I argue against this crazy person? And right, like, I'm not. I haven't read all theory. My understanding of philosophy and scientific method and such is more pragmatic. Is like, I find this problem, learn about it. Now I know it, but there are many gaps in my understanding. But still, it's pretty good. Especially most science denial circles really fail at the first couple of steps of the process. We don't really need to be very sophisticated. When I debate people in this regard, I don't even use the all this knowledge. I just push buttons on their sense of self-consistency. Like, I ask them something that I think would make them distrust their selves.
Exactly. So, that's called street epistemology, or the Socratic method. And
exactly.
What you do is repeatedly say, how do you know that?
Yeah.
And they tie themselves in knots.
Yeah, well, they use an ad hoc explanation, but, well, at least it's obvious that they are making it up. So, job done.
I want to get back to what you said about epistemology and this idea of distrusting the experts. And I always get to the point where I'm sort of struck by the conundrum that we are, in a way, constantly caught up by, or caught up in, that we need to be skeptics. But I think I would like to qualify that by saying there's something like, and I'm just talking off the cuff here, there's something like healthy skepticism. And I also think there's something like unhealthy skepticism. So as Diogo said, the trouble that we have in the modern era, where we have access to so much knowledge, but we don't always know how to evaluate the information that we are given. And this is a little bit of a rabbit, or maybe a massive rabbit hole that we don't have to go into, but Yuval Harari said about AI, or artificial intelligence, that the greatest threat of something like artificial intelligence is that it can literally break the internet, because my voice, my face can be manipulated to say something that I never said. And how can the regular viewer out there, the regular person who watches things, how can he determine whether I actually said this, or whether it's AI that manipulates my voice and my face? And that's the conundrum that we have gotten stuck in. And I really want to say that I do think it's a conundrum, because to learn how to distinguish where to go, who to trust, that's no easy task. And most people don't have neither the time, nor the will, nor the resources to not only be experts about a certain topic. How do you just imagine what type of expertise you need to determine whether the video you're watching is actually an accurate representation of what that person said?
Yeah,
and
right.
I think we need to appreciate that conundrum and how to deal with it, because we need to be skeptic. But when does it become unhealthy? And I don't have an answer. I'm not pretending that I have an answer. I think it's a discussion we need to have.
Sure, that's fine. That's a good question, because the more often than not, if you really account the times you do or don't, you don't know things. You just don't have enough information. So what you have to keep at the back of your mind all the times, even on things you think you are sure, is maybe I don't know. Maybe you just don't know. Like someone, even simple things like the Earth. Someone tells me the Earth is flat because of this argument I've never heard before. I don't know how to counter. All right. So let's assume that the Earth is flat for a while. It's that simple. And like, there are kinds of knowledge which are useful and kinds which are not. Knowing the Earth is flat or round usually is not a big deal. You can pretend the Earth is flat and your life will still go on. Just don't propagate bad thinking. Like, if someone asks you, is the Earth flat? Do you believe the Earth is flat or not? You just say, well, according to this argument I have never heard before, it kind of convinced me. But what do you think? Do you think it convinces you too? And that person might tell you a good counter argument, which will say, well, then I was right the first time when I thought the Earth was round.
Yeah. It's a grey area nowadays, isn't it? Because of the internet, everyone thought when the internet hadn't really begun that it was going to be a wonderful spreader of knowledge.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's equally wonderful at spreading disinformation.
What we found out with the internet, which is very interesting, nobody would have expected this, is that more knowledge does not equal more wisdom.
No.
So we have a huge amount of knowledge today. Even the most crazy people have more information than you would have otherwise. But our brains, or monkey brains, aren't adapted to deal with that. We deal with patterns, like I've seen this work before, so I'll keep doing this, and this develops superstition. But straight factual knowledge has no effect on our emotions and feelings, so it has no effect on our identity, so we won't retain the information or won't agree with it.
That's right. We like stories. That really grieves me. As a retired science teacher, I really dislike the fact that narrative has become more important to people than evidence.
Yeah, it really is. I'm different. I'm autistic, so my narrative part of the brain doesn't work properly, but most people aren't.
Yes, but you're right. This is a grey area, and Tercy is right too, because where is the boundary between normal skepticism and contrarianism or conspiracy theorism? Where do we put that? How do we know which side of?
I think the useful contrast here is between skepticism and cynicism.
Oh yeah.
If you disagree with something because you don't have enough information to trust it, or if you disagree with something because you have information you want to hold on to.
You're motivated to win.
Exactly.
By knocking something down. Yes, I see where you're coming from. Interesting.
I like what you're saying, and the difference between too much wine, cynicism and skepticism. I like that differentiation. I want to say two things. The first one is the idea, John, that you mentioned about where is the boundary between cynicism and skepticism, and I think. And that leads me to the second remark that I want to make. You said, Diogo, that you mentioned the animal brain, or what was it?
I said monkey brain.
Monkey brain. That's what. Well, animal, monkey, same thing. that thing. And we often forget that we are just monkeys. And we are far less rational than we think we are. And most of our responses are not based on rational thought, at least not nearly as much as we would like to believe. And I want to hear your comments about, you said, for example, whether you believe the earth is flat or round, and I agree with you 100%, what your belief about that is, it doesn't really have an effect on your daily life. And the funny thing is, flat earthers still use GPS, and they still use their cell phones, and they still watch satellite TV, although they don't believe in satellites. But that's neither here nor there. The problem that begins when the reason why you believe the earth is flat becomes problematic, because why we believe certain things often most of the time relate to other things as well. So if you believe the earth is flat because the Bible tells you so, or the Quran tells you so, for example, then other beliefs that you hold are going to also be based on that reasoning. And while it's not harmful to me whether you believe the earth is round or flat, it is very much harmful to me whether you believe that vaccines work or not. And I'm not talking about COVID vaccines, I'm talking about the measles vaccine. So I think we need to ask more questions about why we believe what we believe, whatever. Exactly. So it's not so much what we believe as why we believe what we believe. What do we base that belief on? And John, you said that it's very comfortable and very easy to base our beliefs on a narrative, and we are bound to narrative. I mean, I don't think we can ever, even science in a way is sort of a narrative.
Sure.
Sure. But how we cling to that narrative. And I think that's what makes the scientific method different from other narratives. The scientific method is continually rewriting the narrative. And whereas other mythical narratives or religious narratives, they become so fixed that they become dogma.
Yes.
And that's where we get stuck. Whereas one of the key principles of the scientific narrative, if you want to use that word, is continually revising based on new evidence. And that you, as somebody who's dabbled in programming and who's focused in your work, you said you were a technician. If there's a new technology, like in Galileo's day, the telescope, or in Antoni van Leeuwenhoek's day, the microscope. Until Antoni van Leeuwenhoek put his own semen under the microscope, people thought with perfect reasonable, I mean, they weren't unreasonable to think that the man's semen contains little miniature humans, and that is just implanted into the woman, and the womb is like soil, and this little miniature human grows and then pops out. And it took technology to revise the evidence, to evolve, to grow it an entirely new science. And I think that's the difference, and that's what we need to explain to people. We don't want to change your narrative. You can just go where the narrative goes.
Well, you've touched in a couple of very important points. Firstly, I just want to get out of the way the idea of when we think about what we think versus how we think what we think. And that is something people overlook, but it's very, very important. It's called metacognition, the ability to ask about what you think. And I think when one of the things artificial intelligence fails is in metacognition. Like if you ask another person where you are or what you are, the person will say, well, I'm this meat sack and I'm currently on the floor, standing up, etc. But the machine, the current artificial intelligence, will say whatever the human is saying, instead of saying I'm inside this black box with wires and in a server room. The machine isn't capable of evaluating its reality and why it speaks like a human. It just does it. So more about the instruments of science. Look, when we talk about technology, it's rather easy to test. Either it works or it doesn't. When we are talking about claims like the shape of the Earth or the place of the planets or the past, of the past, it's more abstract, and that's why we have deniers in these areas and not deniers in like computers don't work, stuff like that. There are people with strange ideas about how computers work, but they won't deny that they work. Anyone could look at Galileo's telescope and notice, really, this really magnifies distant objects, so of course it's working. But they might deny how useful it is, or if Galileo is seeing whatever he's claiming he's seeing.
Well, of course, in the early days, and I've forgotten the name of the guy who did this, the telescopes were so bad, one of the observers thought he saw canals on Mars, of course.
Yeah, I know that story. It's
well, and I just want to say a little bit of science history. The first use of most telescopes were extremely useful because if you could spot an enemy ship 2 hours in advance, it gave you the edge in battle. So, and what Galileo did that was so dramatic was to not just look straight forward, but to turn the telescope and look up. And I think that's what science does. Science changes the direction. It uses technology. It's such a nice symbolism for me, so powerful that when Galileo was introduced to the telescope, it was because it had a practical function to keep enemy ships at bay for a long, or to have advance warning. And the revolutionary thing that Galileo did was to take that instrument and instead of just looking horizontally, he looked up. And by just changing your point of view, you revolutionize what happens.
Yeah, your view on the world changes. The things you can do with that knowledge also changes. Some people give value to that. Sometimes the changes aren't that significant, and it's easy to hindsight. But yeah, so when people's life is at stake, they usually accept the correct position, unless they die while trying the wrong position. But that's another matter. So I want to, if you don't mind, I wanted to jump here to a bit. So let's talk a bit generally about the God belief, because people often ask, do you believe in God, or which God do you believe? And I always thought that was the wrong question. It's kind of a meaningless question, actually, because first you need to define what you mean by God. If someone suddenly came to me and said, I just found out about the snail cats. You really have to listen to the message of the snail cats. And I'm like, what's a snail cat? Why should I care? People don't think like this towards God, because the word God happens all the time. And so it feels natural. Even if they don't really know what it means, they pretend they know, because of course everybody knows it's common sense.
In my opinion, people who think like that, they seek certainty too strongly. They want absolute answers when they may not be available. So they pick on one, even though it doesn't have necessary foundation in evidence, just because it closes off that doubt, and then having made that decision, they do what Tercia mentioned just now. They become dogmatic, and that's where the problems start, because the arguments between the dogmatic people and groups of dogmatic people who side for one view are formed. We get tribal disagreement.
There are two really weird things I've heard about America. First is homeowners associations.
Oh.
If I have a private home, I don't know why I'm paying or respecting the opinion of some elites, but whatever. Another weird thing about America is why people this homeowners association tangent was a bit too much, but what was I saying? Please repeat what you said before, Richard.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that whenever I get into have these conversations about, and homeowners associations is a prime example. We must always remember that we have monkey brains, and monkey brains are not rational. And some of us have, I'm of the opinion, and the more I experience life, if we don't believe in gods, our monkey brains are actually broken.
Oh, that's right. Community. That's what I was trying to remember. So the other weird thing is people who will ostracize others because of their beliefs.
Yes, shunning. Yes,
exactly. Like you have a tight-knitted community of people who go to the same church, and suddenly the child in one of the families is like, I don't believe in God for whatever reason, and suddenly everyone starts hating that family. Yes. And like by itself it doesn't make sense, but this is something that keeps people entrenched in their community, like they want to be respected by their community, so they will pretend they believe things, and I think that's really terrible. That's atrocious, in my opinion.
Yes, it disappoints me because, of course, it comes from this idea that you mustn't be challenged, that you're right, and the criticism is taboo, and and doubt is also taboo, because you've got to absolutely know something 100%. And in fact, that's an entirely opposite mentality to the way scientists think.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Look at this. In science, it's quite all right to admit you don't know. Look at this.
So we just don't know.
We just don't know. That's correct.
Two scientists agreeing that they don't know. Nothing shameful about that.
Yeah, I've debated several people, either for politics reasons or for religious reasons, where I said, well, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you know, sometimes you don't. It's not a big deal. You just try again or learn more about it. And the other person was like, what? That's impossible. I have to win all the time. I have to always know about this. And if I don't know, I will use this crazy idea I got somewhere else. And they have no reasons to think those things. They can't admit they are wrong.
Indeed.
Well, I just want to say one thing, and I'm known for doing this 6 minutes before the end of the show, to say that I'm of the opinion that we don't have free will, and that everything we've been talking about is because we are determined by our genes and by our biology, and some of us have brains that have some glitch in them, and we have the ability to function metacognitively, and others don't. And while we need to address the fact that we have monkey brains in a variety of different ways, and I just want to say my last piece. You mentioned at least two of my favorite words, Diogo, and I will applaud you for that forevermore. Because when I try to teach critical thinking, which I try to do implicitly and explicitly in my work as a teacher. I teach the kids, and I teach them, they're 10 years old, and I teach them the words epistemology, which is how do we know what we know, or how, I always say, how do we know what we think we know? I always add that, because what we know now and what we know now, we might know it and we might have the right evidence, and 5 days from now we might have a new piece of technology that might reveal to us new evidence, and then we have to revise what we thought we knew yesterday. But I teach them the word epistemology, and the second word I teach them is metacognition. I think it's my most favorite word, metacognition. And I always say to them, you have to begin to think about your thinking. And while it can take one on a crazy journey, I think it's one of the best journeys to go on. And I just want to say, with 4 minutes left, I will never stop being engaged in metacognition, but it's so much more fun to do it with people like John and like Diogo. So I've had so much fun. And thank you so much for using two of my absolute favorite words. And I'm no philosopher, but let's go for epistemology and metacognition and be cross-free. And now I will keep my peace and just say goodbye when John says I'm allowed to say goodbye.
So there you go.
Might be what makes us human. I don't know if other animals can do metacognition, really. Might be wrong about that, but it doesn't seem like. Also, because I'm a pragmatist.
We might just not have the technology yet to access animal brains.
Yeah,
my son, who's almost 17, mentioned the other day that octopi, I hate that word octopi, octopuses, I don't know, it's just a terrible word. But those things with 8 legs that live in the ocean, that they are
calamari.
Thanks, John. That they are so unique and they're so intelligent and they can learn, and so maybe 10 years from now we might have technology that will enable us to realize that octopuses have been ridding the world all these many years, and that they have been metacognitive, and they've been watching us. Just keep it just on this journey through the galaxy. Always have a towel, and if you can get hold of a Babel fish, plug it in your ear.
It's octopuses instead of mice, right?
Yes. We both read the same book. Anyway, you're right, Tercia, we're coming to the end of our hour, but I do want to plug next week's guest, because we've got you may or may not know that Atheism UK, because I'm now the executive president. I've added a word to my title, so I'm the executive. and that's to stop confusion between me and AC Grayling, who is the honorary president. You see, so we've separated us that way, but we've started a new branch, is what I'm leading up to saying. It's in the Midlands, around Birmingham, Derby, those places, Nottingham, you know. And our guest next week is a lady who is in that branch, and it's a very active branch. So Hannah will be coming to talk to us about her life and thoughts on becoming an atheist in the Midlands of the UK. There you go.
Hey, Richard, can I give a final note?
Sure.
So I really enjoyed our conversation here. I'm wondering if you could invite me again, because I brought like 3 pages of notes and barely touched them.
You only done one of them, yes. Well, yes, I'm sure we'd love to have you back sometime. We are fairly booked up at the moment, so it'll have to be in 2024.
Yeah, that's fine. I can wait.
Which is which is just around the corner. And I just want to say, John, I love having somebody below the age of 40 on our show. It's fantastic. and then he's nice to look at as well. So yes, absolutely. And we'll just keep an eye. We'll keep you slotted, and I'll see to that, Diogo. I'll see to that. But yes, thank you so much for your time, and metacognition and epistemology. And send me your notes. Get my email address from John, and send me your notes. I'd like to read through them.
All right. I'll ask him later after I go to bed, because it's really late.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.
So I don't think I've uploaded the outro for Diogo. What's going on here? It's here somewhere. Where have I put it?
Also, let me tell you, I'm disappointed. Otangelo is not here.
Oh, where is Otangelo?
When you want him, yes.
He's like God. When you need him, he's not here. He doesn't show up.
Yes. So I'm going to have to play an outro which is non-specific. It's a shame, because I made one for you. I've just lost it. So here we go. Thank you very much, everybody taking part and everybody watching, both now and in the future, with a particular mention to Gabriella and Ex-Muslims UK and anybody else who's been taking part in our show. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
And somewhere here is the out. Last week's outro.